Hey nerds, what's up? Today we're going to talk about whether or not we can define a bar of good in fantasy and if certain books can be definitively good or bad. It'll be an interesting discussion. See you after the jump. So a while ago, I watched Pete's video on Objectivity, which led me to Michael's video on Objectivity, and they were both great videos. I was super interested in them, and I don't know what they were originally responding to, but I personally agree with the points in their video. And basically what their video talks about is that there really can't be pure objectivity when we're reviewing a book because we bring so much with us when we review something, and it's so subjective what we've experienced in our past. And although some things may be able to be objective, for the most part, book reviews are subjective. So ever since I watched these two videos, I've been thinking about this subject a lot, kind of in the back of my mind, and I want to talk about something adjacent to this. Not exactly on objectivity and reviewing itself, but objectivity in general as it relates to our overall opinions on books. So to set this up, something I noticed on Reddit a whole lot before I ended up reading the First Law trilogy is how often Redditors loved to pit the Stormlight Archive versus the First Law trilogy. And they were pitting these together not in the fun way where you get to discuss things, but in the definitive way of we need to duke this out right now and definitively say which series is better. Now, I knew that Abercrombie wrote Grimdark, but these conversations before I read First Law led me to believe that the First Law would be a lot like the Stormlight Archive, that they must be very similar if people keep pitting them together. So imagine my very big surprise when I read and loved the First Law. If you saw my First Law review, you know I enjoyed it quite a bit. That it was so different. In fact, I started wondering why people were pitting these authors together so much. Not that it's wrong, I mean, discussing books is fun, but it feels weird because I'm going to Abercrombie for a completely different reading experience than I'm going to Sanderson. I am getting different things out of those books. They have very different strengths and different weaknesses, and it seems surprising that those are the books you would try to pit together to have an ultimate ruler. So the question that I started posing is there a bar where a book or book series can be objectively good, but subjectively bad? Does that make sense? Another way of saying this being, is there a group of authors we could say are definitively good authors, but whether or not we like their books is subjective? They can still be good or bad to us, but objectively we can say they are good authors. And if we can do that, how would we even measure it? Is it possible to measure? So in classic me fashion, we're gonna diverge a bit for a moment and talk about art. The reason I want to use art as an example is that it has been an argument in the art community for literally centuries about what makes good art. And I think it'll be useful to examine another kind of related sphere, but not talk about books themselves. In the 18th century, the Enlightenment period in particular seems to be a period of time where people loved to argue about what made objectively good art. Jonathan Richard wrote a piece entitled An Essay on the Whole Art of Criticism, where he detailed 7 categories in which art could be objectively rated. Things like composition and color. A lot of people agreed with him, but of course, a lot of people heavily disagreed. One such person was Dennis Diderot. He made the argument that art was getting more and more informal every day, and that formal criticism would exclude art that was still good, but that maybe didn't form to classic standards. He claimed that one size of art criticism could never fit all art. And honestly, based on my research, this back and forth is still going very strong in the art history community today. As one article I found on art criticism stated, 2 general and related problems in particular have taxed philosophers. The first is the question of whether criticism is a rational activity. That is to say, whether critics can give reasons for their judgments that would persuade potential dissenters of the rightness of those judgments. The second is the problem of the objectivity of critical judgment, it being widely believed that critical appraisals are wholly subjective or just a matter of taste. Now, if you really want to go down a rabbit hole, go down the rabbit hole of taste. What makes taste good or not? There are a lot of people who believe taste is objective and that some people just have good taste, while other people think it's very subjective, or some people are just better at following trends and trends are subjective themselves, but that's a topic we don't have time to get into today. An interesting point was made by Bart Vandenbiel in his essay on Schopenhauer and the objectivity of art. In it, he said, although many people would surely agree that art stretches and extends the way we come to see the world, enhances our understanding and enriches our mental life, few would probably claim that art provides us with an objective knowledge of the world. If they do afford us some kind of knowledge or understanding, it will always be mediated by the artist's subjective view of the world. Essentially, what that's saying is that creating art in itself is a subjective practice. Everything an artist pours into their work comes from their life experiences and what they've done, and it's very subjective. So how can we take a subjective piece of art and put objectivity on it? Viewing art and loving art is subjective in itself. And there's definitely arguments against that, and I can see and understand those, but I do think it's a very interesting point about the creation of art itself. Now, thinking of all this in art has brought me to this. Maybe the question isn't whether there is something that is good or bad in writing. Maybe instead we need to start talking about, is there a level or bar of skilled versus unskilled in writing? And then after that, we can dole out good or bad as we see fit subjectively. This would be attempting to put as much objectivity into this as possible, because certainly the terms skilled and unskilled are more objective than the moral value judgments of good or bad. And if we think about art instead of writing, most of us can look at a piece of art and understand that it is a skilled piece of art. We can understand that the artist needed incredible talent and practice to produce this. That doesn't mean we have to like the piece of art. There are plenty of pieces of art out there that I know were very difficult to make, but I don't want to hang them in my house. They don't necessarily speak to me on a subjective level. Similarly, I have some art in my house that I know wasn't very difficult to make. I know people probably say it's easy or unskilled, but I still like it. Something being skilled or unskilled can be very different from something being good or bad. That is where the subjectivity comes into it. Perhaps defining our fantasy works as skilled or unskilled can take the moral subjectivity out of it, and then we can assign that as we please. And it might make conversations comparing and contrasting these books a little interesting. So can we do it? Is there a bar where we can say that a fantasy novel or author is definitively skilled? First, let's talk about the court of public opinion. This is maybe one obvious way to judge a fantasy work. Is it popular? Has it sold a lot? Has it been on the New York Times bestseller list? Do generally a lot of people like it? This seems like a very simple way to look at a skilled or unskilled fantasy work. But is public opinion enough to really make that designation? What about popular works of writing in our zeitgeist that are very controversial? They have sold a lot and are wildly popular, but people argue that they're not very good. I mean, a big example would be Twilight. There is no denying that Twilight was insanely popular and sold so many copies, but there's this argument surrounding it that it wasn't actually a good book. Another one I think a lot of in our genre is lit RPG. Lit RPGs, especially in the self-published world, are crazy good sellers. They make great money. People love them, but there is still a perception that lit RPG is not literature, that it's not very good, and that's just like easy and fun, but isn't skilled. So popularity can't always tell us definitively what people think is skilled or unskilled. So is it 50-50 that makes it not skilled? Like if we think of Twilight, is that the discussion? What is enough? What is enough of popular opinion saying something is skilled to be enough? 90-10, 80-20, I mean, what is it? So maybe we need to move on to a different kind of court of public opinion and talk about awards. There are some big fantasy awards like the Hugo, the Nebula, the Locus, and many others. Maybe it is the nominations and designation of awards in those spheres that tell us if something is skilled or unskilled. But of course, this isn't just clean either. What about all the controversies that have surrounded these nominations and awards in the past? People often complain about these awards, that they get political or that there's cheating or that they don't look at the whole sphere or that things get very overlooked. And controversies aside, there's not that many nomination spots or awards. So are we really going to limit skilled works to the things that are known enough to be nominated for this award, or just the small subset that are? I don't know. It doesn't necessarily seem fair. Do we trust a small subset of judges with individual tastes to speak for all of us as a whole onto what is skilled and unskilled? I don't know. So if the court of public opinion isn't enough to say that something's skilled or unskilled, what else can we look at? Should we treat our novels like art and make specific categories that you rate a book in? Let's talk about skill category ratings. Now, I'm going to specifically obviously be talking about the fantasy genre, which I think will have different categories than regular literary fiction because there's kind of more involved. So just generally thinking, I came up with about 6 things I think of when I'm rating a fantasy book. I'm sure there's more, but it's just what I thought of, which is prose, characterization and character voice, world building, magic, the theme's message of the novel, and the plot. Here's the problem though. I don't think there's really an objective way to judge all 6 of these. With art, it can be a little different. There's actually like physics and science about some of the things like ratios and color theory, but I researched, and it is hard to find something that like is definitive about any of these topics. I mean, let's just start with prose. That seems like the easiest one. Prose, does it have good prose? Problem is, what is good prose? It's kind of one of those things that you know it when you see it, but is hard to define. Like there is no like adjective to noun ratio that's gonna tell you have good prose. We just read it and are like, that was nice, right? Because there's 2 extremes. There's distractingly bad, and then there's also purple prose. And good prose isn't just a set of grammatical rules. I've read plenty of things that are grammatically correct that I wouldn't be like, wow, this is good prose. And all of the examples and writing tips on good prose are pretty subjective. It's things like, don't repeat words too much, make sure you use adjectives, describe things well. And it's like, well, I could technically follow all that advice and still not have good prose. It's something you've got to feel and you've got to practice. We can't talk about what good prose is because it's just as artistic of an endeavor as a good art piece. There isn't a science behind it. It just kind of is what it is. And then what about world building or magic system? How can you definitively and objectively judge a magic system? We could talk about Sanderson's laws of magic that he talks about, where he talks about the harder your system of magic is, the more you can use it to solve problems, and the softer your magic system is, the less you can use it to solve problems. But there's a conceit in that. It means that you have to subscribe to Sanderson's view of magic. And what makes Sanderson the definitive judge on what makes good magic systems? You know, there's a lot of people who hate what Sanderson's doing for his magic systems because they feel like it takes all of the magic out of magic. I've seen that a lot. People like the soft Lord of the Rings magic where it's just very out there and you don't know what it is. But at the same time, Sanderson's magic is what has made him as famous and popular as he is. So how can we objectively say one person's opinion on that is better than another person's opinion on it? How do we measure that? Is it measurable? Okay, before I went off on that tangent, let's go back to my list of 6 things. The other problem is that often books that are good don't have all 6 of those things. Let's use Abercrombie and Sanderson as the example since we've been talking about them a lot in this novel. Abercrombie, just like the greatest of all time in character voice. In my opinion. I know this is an opinion, but I feel like it's pretty hard to deny that he's not good at character voice. I mean, he just excels at it. And his magic and world building is super interesting, right? But some people think he struggles with plot, let's say, right? His novels not necessarily have a ton of plot. His expertise is in other areas. We compare him to Sanderson, like, come on guys. I am a huge Sanderson fan, but we all know we're not reading Sanderson for his prose, okay? We're not going in for these beautiful sentences. It's not what we're reading him for. We're reading him for his vast world building knowledge and his vast magic systems and his great characterization. Different than character voice, but a lot of those things. Abercrombie and Sanderson excel at different things and they don't hit everything on that list. So how many do you have to hit on that list? Is 4 out of 6 enough? Is 5 out of 6 enough? Can you only be skilled if it's all 6 out of 6? Because then I don't think Sanderson or Abercrombie fit into that skilled list. And let's even compare the magic systems of Abercrombie's world and Sanderson's world. The conceit is totally different. Sanderson is a world steeped in magic, and Abercrombie's whole purpose of writing his is about a world where magic is leaving it. They are both interesting and they are both good in my opinion, but they are so different. So where does the objectivity come in rating that? How is it not subjective? And finally, if we all know good when we see it, why is this so dang hard to define? So what's the metric between skilled and unskilled? In my personal opinion, I think it's actually a mixture of kind of the court of public opinion and these kind of hard skill sets that we recognize. The truth of the matter is, public opinion does matter a little bit. I think as readers, we read a lot, and when we know good things, when we see it, we tend to buy those things more and talk about them and uplift them in our communities. And again, it might not be as objective as we would like, but I do think in general, readers who read a lot can recognize skill in different areas. We can recognize good character voice and prose, and we can recognize good storylines and plot and themes and messages, even if we don't have a way to necessarily define why it's so good. Now, because there's a public perception area to this that I've talked about, Will there be underrated things and super skilled things that will never come to light? Of course, that's just the nature of our world. There are millions and millions and millions of books in the world, and ultimately, unfortunately, popular ones can continually sell and it kind of builds up on each other, why something that's very good might fall to the wayside. But that's gonna be with anything. That's gonna be with art. That's gonna be with music. There's any endeavor, that's how it is. I mean, think of all the artists who weren't appreciated till after they were dead. It's a very common thing. This is just the best we can do. Can we just talk about some people who are definitely skilled? I've been reading fantasy for a really long time. I've been reading fantasy since I was a really young kid, okay? I've always loved fantasy. And so I think and feel that I have some names that I feel like have always been talked about and have always been around, and I think there's a weight to that, and we can say that they're skilled. Now, I understand a lot of people are going to be like, just because something's popular doesn't make it good. And I agree with you, I understand. But I do think there's a weight to some of these names that never leave and that are in our kind of public awareness and that are good. Now, I am not claiming this list is definitive. No, in no way. These are just the names that immediately come to mind when I think of fantasy, and I think they deserve it. In alphabetical order, I thought of people like Abercrombie, Clark, Erickson, Gaiman, Hobb, Jordan, Le Guin, Martin, McCaffrey, Pratchett, Rothfuss, Sanderson, and Tolkien. Okay, don't hate me if your favorite isn't on the list. I'm not pretending that's a definitive list. It's just people that come to mind when I think of generally good and loved fantasy. Okay, so if you're still with me at this point, it's been a very long video, you're probably like, so what? What are you even talking about? Why are you talking about this? I'll tell you why. I just think it improves the nature of our conversation about books. If we can agree that a certain set of books or authors are skilled, then when we assign good or bad to them, we can understand that it is a subjective rating based on our own views and things that have happened in our life and our own personalities. And maybe this is useless to you. Maybe I'm the only one who cares about this, but I'm so tired of these useless conversations where fandoms battle it out over which of their authors are supreme when both authors are just skilled. Both authors are good. They're good at different things. They're skilled at different things. And it's perfectly okay to discuss them. I mean, I think it's super fun. But understanding that my discussion and like of one over the other is subjective and not objective. That there is not an objective answer at some point between skilled works of art. And that it becomes completely subjective whether you think they're good or bad. Just because they're skilled doesn't mean you can't dislike them. Of course you can, just like with art. But understanding that, I think, makes the conversation a little bit less likely to attack individuals and more likely to discuss our works in general. A good example that I've legitimately seen on Reddit is when someone said that people who like Sanderson have a lower IQ than people who like Abercrombie. Like that's just dumb, right? It's just a subjective opinion. And so when we can realize that, then instead of attacking each other as fandoms, maybe we can actually do the fun thing and just discuss the works themselves and why subjectively we may like one work over the other. So did I just take 30 minutes to say something obvious? Probably, but here's the summary. I think there may be a way to agree that certain authors and series and books are skilled or unskilled. And that way we can change the conversation about good and bad to be subjective and understanding that it is our personal view whether these things are good or bad. I believe this will change the nature of our conversations to be more interesting and to discuss things like themes and world building and character voice and prose rather than attacking fandoms for liking something over the other and insisting that our way is the definitive right way to view the world. Anyway, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this video. I think there's going to be a lot of different opinions, and I feel like there may be a lot of people who feel like there is more objectivity in rating or reviewing a book than I do. I feel like it's a very subjective thing. So I would just really love to hear your thoughts, particularly on objectivity versus subjectivity, on the categories I made for a skilled fantasy writer, on whether you feel like awards or the court of public opinion matter, and if they do, how much do they matter? I'd also like to know how you feel about conversations when people try to definitively answer the question if one book or series is better than another book or series. Do you actually like those conversations? Do you find them to be productive? Or like me, do you feel like they tend to be unproductive unless you're trying to discuss things for fun? Either way, I'd really like to hear your opinions on this. I feel like this could be a very interesting topic of debate, And for me, it feels like this video has posed more questions than it's answered. It's something I'm gonna have to keep thinking about as I continue to experience the world, and I don't necessarily think my answer is right, it's just what I currently think now. So I'd be curious if any of you have something great to add. So please, please, please leave comments below on what you think. And as always, if you like this kind of video, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.